Okay, I'm starting the recording, so feel free to cough and open wrappers and all that stuff.
Not hack.
All right, I'm gonna start. So, here we go. Oh yay, you made it! Yay! Welcome in. This is Paolo and Caitlin. They're my best friends. They're from the jazz world. Caitlin's from the dance world. They're very cool. It's so good to see you guys. I think this is everybody we're expecting. It's gonna be a small crowd, nice and intimate, as we say when nobody shows up. Excuse me. So, I'll go ahead and get started. So like I was telling them, the reason that I'm doing this is so that I'm applying to a creative grant. And so in getting that grant, I wanted to up my resume before the grant submissions close. So I'm doing a little lecture today, maybe a lecture series in the future, delve into some individual musicians more in depth. Today is going to be kind of an overview. I'm going to try to fit it all into an hour, if that. I have a lot of names. I also have a list of names at the end, which I will tell you, of featured artists who I did not go in depth about, just to really cover all my bases here. So I guess we get started. So here in New Orleans, there's a place called Dixie's Bar of Music. It opened in 1939 and it hosted live jazz. The house band was fronted by the owner, Miss Dixie Fosnot, who played clarinet and featured famous jazz pianist Dorothy Sloopy. There are a lot of songs written about Dorothy Sloopy. Although Dixie's Bar was not opened with the intention of hosting the LGBTQ community specifically, it quickly became a safe space for the queer community of that era. I mentioned this to demonstrate that while the house musicians themselves may not have been known to be queer, the venue of a regular performance was a queer haven. It very quickly became a gay jazz bar. So jazz, as an emerging art form, was considered deviant and transgressive, much like the commercial queer community. They had that in common. Legally, the musicians who pioneered jazz and the earliest queer identities in America were both prosecuted or denied rights. Segregation of race in America persisted until 1964, impacting the spaces where jazz, as an originally black art form, could exist. Obviously, we know that racism persists to this day, but still, legally, segregation ended in 1964. Same-sex marriage did not get fully legalized in all 50 states until 2015. I remember hearing about when same-sex marriage got legalized on the NPR radio when I was a kid. So jazz and queer culture share a deep intersection politically and socially, both using their voices to change the trajectory of American pop culture. Historically, the queer community holds a general respect and inclusion of jazz, specifically in the area of drag performance and theater and that kind of thing. However, prevalent both in the earliest jazz era to present, the jazz community seems to have disregarded its queer roots and historical influence, at least on a surface level conversation level. Some of the earliest drag performers were also blues musicians. They kind of did their acts together like that. Both of the earliest queer anthems and jazz standards were often borrowed from theater, depicting another avenue of intersection. For example, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, an undisputed jazz standard, as well as a song of hope for the gay community. That's one of the examples. The jazz community owes a significant debt to queer musicians for using their unique perspective to innovate the earliest blues, compose many of the famous jazz standards to date, and politically and socially for aiding jazz in its mainstream acceptance, thus creating some of the most powerful music known to man. So to get started, the first name that I want to cover is a man named Antonio Jackson, Tony Jackson. He was born in 1882 and he died in 1921. He was a pianist, singer, and composer. So he was the first queer musician that we have on record. By 15, he was considered one of the best musicians in town and was soon in the most sought after entertainers in Storyville, yet he continued to face serious challenges in New Orleans, both as an African American and as a gay man. So seeking greater freedom, he came to Chicago in 1912. His influence on Chicago's scene was immense. Jackson helped to lay the foundation for Chicago's reputation as a jazz capital, bringing the music culture of this birthplace to night spots and cabarets throughout Chicago's South Side. Jackson found acceptance through the Stroll, an African-American nightclub district around the intersection of the State and 35th Streets. He was part of the vibrant subculture of Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood, where lots of gay communities flourished in the early 1900s, and aided in making many ways Chicago's version of the Harlem Renaissance. Unfortunately, his music was never recorded. It was kind of before his time. So queer culture and queer jazz existed before recorded music, basically, or modern recorded music. So then we're going to move on. We have a series of jazz, they call them the big three of the blues. There's jazz lesbians. Welcome in, come on in. Hi.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Nice to meet you guys. Come on in. Oh, hey. What is this? My friends. Oh, my goodness. Welcome in. We're just getting started. You haven't missed much. Okay, so where we're at. So the blues scene of the Harlem Renaissance provided black women with a space to explore their sexuality and gender identity outside of the white supremacist gaze, which sexualized and criminalized black women's bodies heavily. Many famous blues women whose queerness was frequently an open secret sang of relationships with women. So this is kind of where queer jazz starts. It's the big three of the blues. There's a couple others who make it into this category. The first one is Ma Rainey, Gertrude Ma Rainey. She was born in 1886 and she died in 1939. She was an American blues singer and influential early blues recording artist. Dubbed the mother of the blues, she bridged earlier vaudeville and authentic expression of Southern blues, influencing a generation of blues singers. She was literally she started it. Rainey was known for her powerful vocal abilities, energetic disposition, majestic phrasing, and a moaning style of singing, which, you can interpret that sexually, you can interpret that as just very a heavy sound, that kind of thing. It says, although most of Rainey's songs that mention sexuality refer to love affairs with men, some of her lyrics contain references to lesbianism or bisexuality. There's one song that I'm doing a show on August 5th where I'm going to be featuring some of these songs. One of them is going to be called Prove It On Me Blues. That song has a lyric, it goes like this: went out last night with a crowd of my friends, they must have been women because I don't like no men. And then if you hear the recording of her singing, it's obviously this is a lesbian. She has this lesbian sound, she sings about women. So we're going to kind of segue into our next big three of the blues. Her protege, Bessie Smith, it was rumored that they got so close that their relationship was romantic in nature. It was also rumored that Bessie Smith once bailed Ma Rainey out of jail after a lesbian party for which police got involved and arrested Ma Rainey. So imagine, police invading gay bars and gay spaces. It's always been happening. Some have called the lesbian and bisexuality among black female blues musicians the open secret of the Harlem Renaissance. We talked about this. So there are some blues singers. There's Alberta Hunter, Etha Waters. They were careful to kind of bury the rumors that they were in that life. Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Gladys Bentley, Clara Smith, and Lucille Bogan did very little to conceal their relationships with women, and I'm going to talk more about them. So, Bessie Smith, born in 1892 and died in 1937, she was bisexual. She has a song called The Boy in the Boat. One of the lyrics is when you see two women walking hand in hand, just look them over and try to understand. They'll go to those parties, have the lights down low, only those parties where women can go. I don't need to say anything else. That's a totally lesbian lyric. Throughout her career, Bessie Smith was unapologetically herself. She drank and was open about her romantic relationships with both men and women. She was married to Jack Gee from 1923 to 1929. Gee was unable to adjust to the show business life or her bisexuality. You can imagine she was cheating on him with women. Their marriage ended in 1929 when Smith learned about an affair between, Gee cheated on Bessie Smith. She learned about an affair between Gee and singer Gertrude Saunders. Smith incorporated the hardships of being a black working class in her lyrics by singing about poverty, racism, and sexism on top of singing about love and female sexuality. While some, such as the Black Swan records, labeled her as rough, Smith's ability to channel her personality and life experience into her voice is really what made her stand out. She was a massive power of the blues. One of the other big three of the blues was Lucille Bogan. My glasses keep falling. See, they do this. Lucille Bogan, she was literally known as Lucille Bull Dyke Bogan, Lucille B.D. Bogan. She was the absolute mother of the blues. I mean, gay people use the term mother. She was mother. Thank you. So she was an American classic female blues singer and songwriter, among the first to be recorded. She was recorded under the pseudonym Bessie Jackson. Music critic Ernest Borneman noted that Bogan was one of the big three of the blues, along with Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith. A lot of her songs have been recorded by other jazz musicians. She's really left an impact. Many of her songs were sexually explicit, and she is generally considered to have been a dirty blues musician. So a lot of racism came her way, a lot of prejudice because she wasn't as clean cut. She wasn't at all in the crooner category. Those really beautiful white men who get away with whatever they want. This is not a very PC lecture, I'm realizing. So one of her songs, BD Woman's Blues, taking the position of a bull dyke with the lyrics, "Come on a time, BD women, they ain't gonna need no men. They just got a head like a sweet angel, and they walk around like a natural man, and they can lay their jive like a natural man." So equating the stance of a woman can take a place as a man. She doesn't need a man, she is the man. That kind of lesbian narrative. So again, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and Lucille Bulldog Bogan were famously headlined as the big three of the blues. Now, I think it should be the big four of the blues because we also have a woman named Gladys Bentley. Maybe the big five, there's a couple people. Gladys Bentley was born in 1907, she died in 1960. There's a reason she's not in the big three of the blues, or the big three of the lesbian narrative, and that's because later in her life, she actually ended up rejecting homosexuality. She became a little more Christianized. She realized that this was not necessarily the life for her. We believe that there was a lot of homophobia in her life, and that's why she kind of got scared and she took a step back from that way. But she got her start after being signed to OK Records, and eventually her name became synonymous with Harry Hansberry's Clam House, which was a well-known gay speakeasy in New York City in the 1920s. She headlined in Harlem's as a black lesbian and a cross-dressing performer, often being backed by drag queens in her performance. So she really had a huge queer start. Bentley was typically dressed in men's clothes, which included a signature tailcoat and a top hat, and was well known to be a spirited piano player for singing risque renditions to popular songs of time in her deep, powerful voice. So another, we just have this lesbian voice. What's up?
Is she the first person on record to make a gay parody of a song?
I think so. I think that would be a correct conclusion to come to.
Amazing.
So for those who didn't hear, because we're also recording, that would mean that Gladys Bentley was the first person to make a gay parody of a song on record. Good point. In her Ebony article, "I Am a Woman Again," Bentley stated, "It seems I was born different, at least I always thought so. From an early age, Bentley defied gender-normative behaviors and femininity. Preferring to wear her brother's suits instead of dresses or blouses, she did not match the early 20th century's beauty ideals of traditional femininity." Bentley recalled dreaming and being infatuated with her primary female school teachers, but did not understand those feelings until later on in her life. Her behavior was seen as abnormal and unladylike, which led to her family sending her to doctors to fix her desires. We have always been doing corrective homosexual therapy. We've always been doing it. It's always been a problem. Later, psychiatrists would coin Bentley's non-heteronormative behavior as extreme social maladjustment. I don't need to say anything else. That's totally, that's very harmful. In her live performances, Bentley frequently called out men and openly sang sexually suggestive lyrics, which was seen as a highly risky behavior at the time, especially for a woman. So if there was a man misbehaving in the crowd, you best believe Bentley was going to say something about it. She often sang about sissies and bull daggers in her performances through innuendo or through rousing dances, and was known to flirt with women in the audiences. Bentley challenged traditional gender roles by performing suggestive songs, openly expressing attraction to women, and wearing masculine clothing. In 1930, she lived with a woman named Beatrice Robert. Technically, they had in 1931, Bentley had a civil ceremony in New Jersey in public union with a white woman whose identity is not confirmed. So technically, Bentley kind of sort of had a public marriage with a white woman. We just don't know who she was. Again, like I said earlier, in later years, Bentley conformed to a much more traditional gender role, arguably due to the rising social conservatism and pressure at the time. She relocated to Los Angeles, married J.T. Gibson, who died in 1952. The same year, she married Charles Roberts, who was a cook in Los Angeles. Gibson, however, denied ever marrying her, so there was enough pressure about her at the time that her husband at the time denied being married to her. Bentley claimed to have been cured of her homosexuality by taking female hormones later in life. She wrote in her 1952 essay, I Am a Woman Again, for Ebony the magazine, that she had undergone an operation which helped her change her life again. She also became a devout member of the Temple of Love in Christ, Incorporated, to be ordained as a minister before her death in 1960. Bentley's transition later in life from her staggering queer presence to her much more tame heteronormativity is a tragic example of how homophobia stripped freedom of expression from queer musicians and performers. So, kind of like I was saying, the big three becomes the big four, becomes the big five. Clara Smith was another one of these huge blues lesbians. In 1910, Smith began working on an African-American civil theater circus in tent shows and vaudeville. By 1918, she was appearing as a headliner with the Theater Owners Booking Association circuit across the southern states. By 1923, she had performed at major theaters of the time, such as the Lyric in New Orleans, Dream Theater in Columbus, and the Bijou Theater in Nashville. She was all over the place as far as vaudeville goes. Pardon me, I'm talking really fast. In 1923, she settled in New York City, appearing at cabarets and speakeasies there. She was signed to recording contracts, and the same year she made the first of her commercially successful series, the gramophone recordings with Columbia Records. She worked with Fletcher Henderson and Louis Armstrong and Don Redman. She recorded 3 duets with Bessie Smith, who we just talked about, The Faraway Blues, I'm Going Back to My Used to Be, and My Man Blues. She also recorded with Tom Delaney. She recorded his Troublesome Blues. Initially a singer of depressing ballads, she later began recording more up-tempo numbers, so she kind of changed her tune. Clara Smith was recording much more sad and somber music, and then she kind of went the upbeat route. Her May 1926 recording of Whip It to a Jelly, which I will be doing at my set, was noted for one of the more overt sexual blues. Smith cut 122 sides, all with Columbia Records, with her record sales being topped only by Bessie Smith, so she really was up there. Clara Smith was known across the U.S., even performing on the West Coast, which was really rare for a blues singer because it was mostly, on the East Coast. During her time performing, Smith met a young Josephine Baker and chose to mentor her. Smith is accredited for giving Baker her start in the recording business, having hired Baker when she was age 13 as her dresser. Smith and Baker are thought to have had a romantic relationship for a time, notably being referred to as lady lovers by a colleague. The women discuss, all of these women so far, they discuss and they exemplify a prominent presence of queer black women pioneering the earliest blues and jazz culture. There is just no denying the overlap of the two cultures. A different aspect of this topic has to do with the prominent compositions of queer musicians, notably one of the heroes of jazz musicians who I look up to, and I play a lot of his music at my shows, is Cole Porter. Coffee break. Anybody need a cigarette? This is my 4th coffee today. Okay, so Cole Porter, I'll get into this, in more depth, but he was just one of the absolute terrors of the American songbook. He wrote so many songs. I have a list. You're the top, you'd be so nice to come home to, you do something to me, what is this thing called love, night and day, love for sale, let's fall in love, just one of those things, it's still lovely, in the still of the night, I've got you under my skin, I love you, I get a kick out of you, I concentrate on you, get out of town, every time we say goodbye, easy to love, begin to beguine, anything goes, all through the night, and all of you. Did anybody lose count? Because I lost count. He wrote all of those tunes. If you go to any jazz jam and you call one of those tunes, Cole Porter is to blame. He just wrote everything. He maintained a luxury apartment in Paris where he entertained lavishly. His partners were extravagant and scandalous, with much gay and bisexual activity, Italian nobility, cross-dressing, international musicians, and a large surplus of recreational drugs. So if you wanted to party, you hit up Cole Porter. In 1918, he met Linda Lee Thomas, a rich Louisville, Kentucky-born divorcee 8 years into his senior. She was beautiful and well-connected socially. The couple shared mutual interests, including a love of travel, and she became Porter's confidant and companion. They married the next year. She was in no doubt about Porter's homosexuality, but it was mutually advantageous for them to marry. This was a lavender marriage, for those who don't know. For Linda, it offered continued social status in a partner who was the antithesis of her abusive first husband. Porter was very sweet to her. For Porter, it brought a respectable, heterosexual front in an era when homosexuality was not publicly acknowledged. Again, lavender marriage. They were moreover genuinely devoted to each other and remained married from December 1919 until her death in 1954. Now, despite Cole Porter being very devoted to his wife, who he was only married to legally, and they shared a very deep friendship, according to biographer Charles Schwartz, Porter favored tall and burly truck driver and sailor types, including both white and black men. Porter was known to have frequented the Buffet Flat in Harlem, where Porter paid for sex, as he often did according to Schwartz, using a number of other pimps to find available men. However, he did have several important romantic relationships with the years, so he wasn't just a whore. First with Boris Kochno, the regisseur for a ballet russe, and then he also had a relationship with Ed Tao, who was a friend of Porter's said that Tao was the great love of Cole Porter's life, so he was his white whale. And then later with director John Wilson, dancer and choreographer Nelson Barclift, and then actor Robert Bray. So Porter was all over the place. He was very good at being a homosexual. Thank you. Lots to say about Cole Porter. He was just one of the monsters of queer jazz. Again, pardon the glasses. Now, one of my favorites, Stéphane Grappelli, was a French jazz violinist. So again, jazz it's international. So he was in France. He was the founder of the Quintet du Hot Club de France with guitarist Django Reinhardt in 1934. It was one of the first all-string jazz bands. He had been called the grandfather of jazz violinists and continued playing concerts around the world well into his 80s. He was a terror. He played on hundreds of recordings, including sessions with Duke Ellington, Oscar Peterson, Claude Bolling, Jean-Luc Ponty, Stuff Smith, Gary Burton, Paul Simon, David Chrisman, Andre Previn, Bucky Pizzarelli, Joe Pass, Yo-Yo Ma, Toots Thielemans, John Burr, and Mark O'Connor. He was all over the place. He was very well connected. He was never married, however, it is widely accepted that he was gay. In 1981, he met Joseph Oldenhove, who would be his companion until death. Until this point, only musicians of lesbian, gay, or bisexual status have been mentioned. While the big three of the blues define gender norms, we still haven't talked about any transgender musicians. One of the most early and prominent examples of a trans musician is Billy Tipton. So in my set next week, when I cover queer jazz musicians, I am not doing a song by Billy Tipton because I keep finding examples where, like the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus did a number about Billy Tipton. There's an all-women saxophone quartet called the Billy Tipton Memorial Quintet or something like that. And in the all-women Billy Tipton Memorial group, in their description on their website, although their music is very good, in the description on their website, they talk about Billy Tipton as a woman who disguised herself as a man, which, if you're hip, you know that that's very anti-trans language. In the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, they do a song about Billy Tipton. I think it's called Tipton. I need to look into that. But the lyrics to that song also feel very transphobic. It feels like nobody is really respecting Billy Tipton's, it's called Brilliant Masquerade. I just remembered, Brilliant Masquerade. Even the title kind of gives away that his identity was just a front. It was just an expression. It wasn't like who he truly was. And so I really am not impressed with any of the music I've heard about him. He did not write any original music. All of his music is just standards and it's just covers, so there's nothing really about him that I can do in my set. But I, out of respect for him, am not doing any of the current songs that are out there because I want to honor the fact that he was actually a man, that he identified as a man, that we're not just discrediting his identity as a woman disguised as a man, because that's not the case. That's not how trans identities work. Maybe in the future, probably in the future, I'm going to write my own memorial tune to Billy Tipton, but I haven't done that yet. So, He was an American jazz musician, bandleader, and talent broker. He is notable for having been posthumously outed as a transgender man. Nobody knew. Like, he started his life as a woman, as a baby girl, grew up, decided, I don't want to do this, became a man, and then, like, married 5 different women. Like, and they just never had sexual relationships. He would say, I wrote it down. He says that he was in an accident, and his genitals were all messed up, and so they just never had sexual relationships. However, there were like 5 women who said that he was just like one of the best husbands they ever had. There were so many people who, I mean, he was just so well loved. So yeah, he was posthumously outed as a woman, which he says was a shock to his children. I think he adopted children. A shock to all of his spouses. Let me just read what I have. I'm a little all over the place. I'm very passionate about Billy Tipton. So, he was born as, I have his dead name here. I'm not even going to say it. You can go find it if you really want to know. He grew up in Kansas City, where he was raised by his aunt after his parents divorced when he was 4. He went by the nickname Tippy in high school and became interested in jazz, playing piano and saxophone. He was not allowed to join the all-male school at his high school. He returned to Oklahoma for his final year of high school and joined the school band at Connor State College High School. Around 1933, that's when he started presenting more masculinely. He started a more serious music career and decided to permanently take on the role of a male musician, adopting the name Billy Lee Tipton. By 1940, he was living as a man in private life as well. So by 1940, he had transitioned. He was never legally married, like I said, but 5 women called themselves Mrs. Tipton during his life. He got around. In 1934, Tipton began living with a woman named Non Earl Harrell. The relationship ended in 1942. His sex was reportedly concealed from the 4 women who would later call themselves Mrs. Tipton. Tipton kept the secret of his sexual characteristics by telling them he had been in a serious car crash that resulted in damaged genitals and broken ribs. Kind of brilliant. His next relationship with a singer who we only know her name is June lasted for several years. Then he also lived with Betty Cox, who was 18 or 19 when they first met, a little young. They eventually became involved. Cox says she remembers Tipton as the most fantastic love of my life. He was with a woman named Mary Ann. Those 2 moved to Spokane, Washington in 1958. Unfortunately, Tipton cheated on her with a nightclub dancer. Kitty Kelly was the nightclub dancer's name. Pretty cool name. So Tipton and Kitty Kelly, settled down together in 1961, and they adopted 3 sons, John, Scott, and William Tipton. Although the adoptions were not legally recognized. A lot of illegal recognition going on here. After they separated in 1977, he resumed his relationship with Mary Ann. I don't know why we don't know these girls' last name, but we don't. Mary Ann reportedly discovered Tipton's birth certificate and asked him about it once and was reportedly only given a terrible look. So he never disclosed anything. He never really got into it with anybody. From heavy smoking and all this, it's just the culture at the time, he got sick. He had a hemorrhaging peptic ulcer, which left untreated was going to be fatal. They called emergency services. He was dying. While paramedics were trying to save Tipton's life, they, alongside Tipton's son William, discovered he was born female. This information came as a shock to nearly everyone, including the women who had considered themselves his wives, as well as his 3 sons and the musicians who had traveled with him. Later, following financial offers from the media, so after the media is paying them big money, Kitty Kelly, and one of their sons went public with the story. The first newspaper article was published the day after Tipton's funeral and was quickly picked up by wire services. Stories about him appeared in a variety of papers, including the National Enquirer, and the Star, as well as People magazine, the New York Times, and Seattle Times. Members of Tipton's family made talk show appearances as well. So Billy Tipton, being a transgender man, was like national news. Like, everybody was super shocked at this information. This was a very new identity for people. People didn't understand. So, unfortunately, it was a much bigger deal than I'm sure Tipton would have liked it to be, because he was very, very secretive about his identity. There was a bunch of So Tipton left all of his family members and all of his sons a pretty wealthy, a good amount of money in his will and all that thing. However, two of his adopted sons, they went ahead and they changed their names legally after learning of Tipton's assigned gender, as they felt Tipton behaved deceptively. So how sad. Tipton's legacy inspired a series of songs, plays, and drag performances telling his story. One tribute to Tipton is the Tipton Sax Quartet, like I said, an all-female saxophone quartet named after Tipton. An interesting point, like I was saying earlier, is again, the language is transphobic in nature. In several biographical articles, he is gendered correctly and referred to as a man born as a woman. However, in the About section for the Tipton Sax Quartet, they describe him as a woman who lived as a man. So, kind of like I was saying, like Tipton, his identity is still just not being respected as we need it to be. He is a man, he's not a woman disguised as a man or anything like that. He's just a man. So, I learned about this next one last night. I've been, I tried to finish this lecture a couple days ago, but I discovered a new piece of information like last night or the night before. So I'm in the habit now where whenever I look up a jazz musician, I look them up, I read their Wikipedia page, and then I go to a new tab and I type their name and then the word gay, and I just see what comes up. And I'm just kind of in the habit, like somebody came to my Instagram DMs and told me Stan Getz. And I was like, no way. And I looked up Stan Getz, not gay. However, this next one, I just kind of had a feeling. And I was thinking, I'm going through my set list for next week, and I'm deleting this one, and I'm adding this one, and I was like, you know what tune I love that I never do? It's Fly Me to the Moon. I've never done Fly Me to the Moon. I love it. I've done it as like a request once, but I've never truly done it. My favorite is to do it as a 3/4 ballad. That's how it was originally written. Not like the Frank Sinatra super up-tempo, but it was a ballad. It was very sweet and subdued. And then I looked up the composer, Bart Howard. And then, out of habit, I looked up Bart Howard Gay. And guess what I found? Bart Howard wrote Fly Me to the Moon, originally a ballad in 3/4 time. He was in a relationship with Thomas Fowler for 58 years. And upon their death, they were given a joint headstone bearing the word companions. Isn't that the sweetest thing in the world? So Fly Me to the Moon was written with Bart's love for Thomas in mind. I can't say enough about that. That was just one of the sweetest things to discover. Can you imagine having the love of your life and you're buried next to each other? They're buried in North Texas. We could go see them. Anyway, so then we're going to move on. So one of the most prominent voices in all of blues and all of jazz is Billie Holiday. So Billie Holiday had what appeared to be a romantic relationship with this actress, Tallulah Bankhead, while they were performing on Broadway together in the late 1940s. A film about Holiday, The United States versus Billie Holiday, shows clips of Holiday and Banker romantically involved in the trailer. However, all mention of their relationship was omitted from the final film. Interesting. So, sometime between 1949 and 1952, Tallulah began to distance herself from Billie. Afraid that her career would be destroyed if people knew about their relationship, Tallulah didn't mention Billie in her 1952 autobiography once. A few years later, when Billie was working on her own autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues, a copy of the manuscript was sent to Tallulah, who threatened to file a lawsuit if she wasn't kept out of the book. So somebody was really, pressured by the homophobia at the time. On January 12th, 1955, Billie responded with an embittered letter, shown below in the transcript. Billie never received a reply to her letter, and in the end, Tallulah was mentioned in her autobiography, mentioned just as a friend who came around the house to eat spaghetti. Sounds a little silly, but it's really sad. So, where is this letter? Did I not include it? Maybe I didn't include it. Anyway, my point is Billie Holiday, her bisexuality, it was lived privately but palpably, and it deeply shaped the way she experienced and sang about love. While society imposed rigid roles and limitations, she embraced ambiguity, favoring emotional interpretation over emphasizing the gender of her beloved. Her way of portraying love was never tied to a clear him or her, but to intensity, risk, and loss. She was an extremely powerful voice, and her identity represents a greater picture. that of a persecuted artist dismissed for her race, sexuality, and artistic expression. She was especially tormented and punished for her drug addiction, an unfortunately common trial in the early and modern jazz community. But even still, Holiday persisted, making her voice known in that era, and despite people wanting to squander her. And for that, she's an icon to the jazz and the queer community. I got a lot of names to cover, and we are running out of time. Billy Strayhorn was another man that I love to cover. I love doing his tunes. For a huge production that Paolo put on, Paolo and Caitlin, we did a huge dance and music. It was kind of a variety show of acts and featuring lots of queer and cultural performances. I sang in their song in their production. I did a song by Billie Holiday called "God Bless the Child," and I did a song by Billy Strayhorn called "Lush Life." "Lush Life" was a ballad written about his homosexuality, and like how his homosexuality affected his life, how the homophobia at the time affected his life, and how, like, the lyrics are "life is lonely again, life is awful again." It's a very heartfelt, very sad ballad. He was Duke Ellington's right-hand man. He wrote a bunch of jazz standards that we play today, like Passion Flower, Lotus Blossom, Just a Sittin' a Rockin'. He did lots of collaborations with Duke Ellington, like, the lengthy work Black, Brown, and Beige was muchly attributed to Strayhorn. He had a romantic relationship with this drummer, Aaron Bridgers, who was introduced to Strayhorn by Ellington. I have so much more to say about Billy Strayhorn, but I'm going to keep going because, again, we got a lot of names to cover. I need more coffee, and we're running out of time. Any questions so far? I wasn't going to answer them. Ralph Joseph P. Burns. Ralph Burns was an American jazz pianist, composer, and arranger. He collaborated with Billy Strayhorn, Lee Konitz, and Ben Webster to create both jazz and classical recordings. He wrote compositions for Tony Bennett, Johnny Mathis, and later Aretha Franklin and Natalie Cole. Burns was responsible for the arrangement and the string orchestra on two of Ray Charles' biggest hits, Come Rain or Come Shine and Georgia on My Mind. He also arranged music for Mel Torme, John Pizzarelli, Michael Feinstein, and Tony Bennett. So he was another very well-connected gay man. He was unfortunately closeted his whole life. It came out very much later in his life that he was a gay man. One of the names mentioned that Ralph Burns worked with was Johnny Mathis. Johnny Mathis was like the star. He was just it. He was absolutely it. He was born in 1935. In a 1982 Us Magazine article, Mathis says, "Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to." He later said this comment was supposed to have been off the record and did not publicly discuss his sexual orientation for many, many years. In 2006, Mathis says that his silence had been due to death threats he received as a result of the 1982 article. Can you imagine? You come out accidentally and then you get death threats? That still happens today, but back in the day, it's just so serious. In April 2006, we were all alive in 2006, he addressed the subject again on the podcast The Strip and said his reluctance to speak about it was partly a generational issue. One of the things he says is he's confirming he's gay. He says, "I come from San Francisco. It's not unusual to be gay in San Francisco. I've had some girlfriends, some boyfriends, just like most people, but I never got married, for instance. I knew that I was gay." That was part of his coming out story. Johnny Mathis, Bob Dylan, Barbra Streisand, Tony Bennett, Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, forgive me, it's a mouthful, are Columbia Records' longest tenured artists. Just to kind of give you an example of how prominent Johnny Mathis was in the recording scene and hitting the charts and that kind of thing. He was a big name. One of the other big names is Dave Koz, born in 1963. So we've jumped a decade or so. Dave Koz was one of the how do I explain, more pop jazz, more ballads, more 80s kind of sound, more synthesizers involved. And he was a very prominent gay man. He collaborated with Ray Charles, Natalie Cole, Celine Dion, Stevie Wonder, Barry Manilow, Valerie Simpson, Kenny Loggins, U2, Michael McDonald, Rod Stewart, and the Foo Fighters. What? Like, he's all over the place. So one of the things I want to mention while I'm here is my article, my whole research, I try to feature any queer musician who partakes in jazz, even if they're not identified as a jazz musician, like a hardcore bebop hard bop jazz musician. I really just want to demonstrate that there's a huge intersection between all things queer and all things jazz. So, kind of on the topic, some people would argue, well, Dave Koz isn't really a jazz musician. I know. It's not my point. He has a jazz association, and so he has a queer association. It's the same thing. Okay, moving on. Cecil Taylor was classically trained and one of the pioneers of free jazz. Free jazz is a very queer sect of jazz. His music is characterized by an energetic physical approach, resulting in complex improvisation, often involving tone clusters and intricate polyrhythms. His technique on piano has been compared to percussion. Referring to the number of keys on the standard piano, a critic, Val Wilmer, used the phrase 88 tuned drums to describe Taylor's style. He has been referred to as the Art Tatum of contemporary classical learnings. Taylor's sexuality may also have been an issue. He was, kind of a conflicted man. Despite the presence of figures like Billy Strayhorn and Dudley Randall, another name, both the jazz world and the poetic currents that coalesced in the black arts were frequently homophobic. As a gay man, Taylor remained, at least officially, in the closet until outed by Stanley Crouch in 1980s. Taylor later recalled, "I began to write poems when I was corresponding with a French poet whom I was in love with in 1962. So he wrote one of his first public poems, the short lyric, it's called Rain, and it obliquely addresses his sexuality, which I'm going to read. Rain. Now and then I let it touch me. Rain. Sweets not tasted in front, roast memories exaggerate aromas. In youth, improbable meetings every 6 months or so. Lilt of flesh beckoned sigh and runaway corner. Seasons far off come and go, and soon Michelangelo, me, and others. Dawn tweeds, stitched, cane. Where'd that relic gotten from? No answer. That's from the Chicago Review. Not a musician, but a writer, Chris Albertson, he was a New York City-based jazz journalist, writer, and record producer. Not a musician, just heavily involved in the...
The library will be closing in 30 minutes, and computers automatically shut off at 20 minutes. If you need any help, we're happy to assist at the circulation desk. We will reopen tomorrow at 9 a.m. Have a good evening.
Does anybody else have a Samsung washing machine or dryer? You know how... So, like the... I don't know what other brands there are. Like, just a freaking... I don't know. Give me another name for a washer dryer. LG. Like, they don't sing that long. But, like, Samsung, like mine, sing... It's like a 32 bar. Like, the voice of God also goes on for 32 bars. That was a joke. Okay, so... Oh my God, we got so many more names. I got like 40 more pages of lecture to go through. I'm gonna kind of skip around a little bit. So Chris Albertson, he was a jazz writer, not a musician. He was a writer. He was a gay man. He talked a lot about the homophobia at the time. But he mostly just wrote about jazz. He's just one of the people in the world who were reading the newspaper and reading magazines to know about jazz. There's also James Carroll Booker III. I love this guy. He's so funny. He has one eye. He's a very interesting person. Where is this quote? There's one. Oh, his style. Oh, the most prominent of Booker's acolytes is Harry Connick Jr. Like, Harry Connick Jr. and James Booker were involved. Like, isn't that cool? I love Harry Connick Jr. Harry Connick Jr., for those who don't know, is kind of like baby Frank Sinatra. Like, he loves Frank's sound. He took a lot of inspiration from that. He's not gay, to my knowledge. If anybody finds that out, please let me know. But he, was one of his things. There's one. Oh, Dr. John, who was just one of his associates, highlighted Booker's singular talents by describing Booker as the best black, gay, one-eyed junkie piano genius New Orleans has ever produced. But even he had to fire Booker after the piano man's drug addictions and erratic behavior became too much to handle. So he was crazy, but he was one of the, again, gay voices of jazz. There's also Jackie Shane. She was transgender. It says she was born in Tennessee. She was born in a boy's body, but from the beginning, her mind, heart, and soul was a black woman. At 4 years old, she was putting on high heels and dresses, trying on her mom's makeup. Her family was supportive of her transition and her transgender identity. It was really cool. What can I say about her? I need to move quickly. She was, again, so she was just, she was an actor, she was a musician. Jackie Shane was one of the earliest examples of a transgender musician, let alone a jazz adjacent. She was more in the genre of like soul and blues, but there's a deep connection between the two. We wouldn't have blues or, soul or jazz without the other. Another transgender musician is Beverly Glenn Copeland. He started his career as a folk singer, incorporating jazz, classical, and blues elements. He says on his own website, what year was he born? He was born in 1944. The diverse work of legendary singer, composer, and transgender activist Beverly Glenn Copeland has been gathering momentum in recent years thanks to the reissue of extraordinary folk jazz explorations of his self-titled album in 1970 and the widespread discovery of his acclaimed masterpiece, Keyboard Fantasies, in 1886. It's a great album, 1986. It was an ahead of its time synth exploration which somehow combines the essence of new age minimalism, early Detroit techno, and the warmth of traditional songwriting. So there has always been a connection between trans people and techno. I'm not gonna talk anymore about him. Irene Schweizer, I love her. I'm doing one of her songs on my set. It's called Zaba. It's really cool. She was a lesbian pioneer of free jazz. Again, that's our second free jazz name. Free jazz is all gay, I promise.
What is free jazz?
Free jazz is any jazz without a form. It's
Okay.
yeah, you can hit all
I'll play
artists.
some in the car, you'll love it.
It's a very controversial. It's like people taking jazz and just exploring as much as you can without necessarily a form, without necessarily clear melodies. Sometimes it uses a lot of dissonance, a lot of cluster sounds, a lot of polyrhythms. It's just anything weird. Obviously that's like the crude way of saying it. Nobody get me in trouble. Irene Schweizer was a lesbian jazz pianist. I'm not even going to talk about this one. Leonard Bernstein, that's all I'm going to say. Just his name. Obviously, I'm not going to just say his name. He wrote I Feel Pretty, Some Other Time, Somewhere, and a song called Tonight. They all appear in the real book. Bernstein was the absolute father of Hollywood and Broadway. He wrote West Side Story. He wrote everything. I also just found out that his right-hand man in all of this Broadway and Hollywood composition was Stephen Sondheim. Stephen Sondheim was also gay. I found that out yesterday. Somehow it had totally escaped me. If you go onto Google and you look up queer jazz musicians or gay jazz musicians, there are a lot of names that don't come up. Again, like Bart Howard. Never came up in my research until last night. I had to Google his name and the word gay. It wasn't just going to come up organically. It's crazy how buried this information is. My mother, my biological mother, Carmen Mercedes McRae, one of the giants of vocal jazz, she was bisexual. She just pioneered all things like queer jazz. If you listen to her and you just think, oh yeah, this sounds like a lesbian. Like she's got that rich sound. There's also Tiny Davis. She was a jazz trumpeter and vocalist. I'm going to say a little bit about her. She married a woman named Ruby Lucas, and they became life partners. Lucas was among the musicians in the Davis Hell Drivers group. Davis and Lucas opened a nightclub in Chicago, Tiny and Ruby's Gay Spot, in the late 1940s, which they ran through the 50s. Not a whole lot of time. But again, considered a queer jazz bar. So we got one in New Orleans, we got one in Chicago. Queer jazz bars are, they're a thing. We need more of them. There's also Mark Murphy. He was an American jazz singer. He was queer. Gary Burton, American jazz vibraphonist. He was gay. He was openly gay. He was married to a woman in the early 80s, and they had 2 children, but he was in a homosexual relationship by the mid-1980s, and he came out publicly in a 1994 radio interview with Terry Gross. And then he married his partner, Jonathan Chong, in Provincetown, Massachusetts. His His current partner is Dustin Lee. Then we have transgender musician Jennifer Latham. She is a massive, she's a great bass player. She's still active in the scene today, so look up Jennifer Latham. She transitioned officially in 2001. There's also Kelly Gray. She's a vocalist from Dallas. She died in 2018. One of her quotes is, Kelly Gray says, basically, yeah, the interesting thing was that I never led with my sexuality ever, and my mother was very much into me being a woman and looking like a woman and being very feminine. And I was sort of a baby dyke early on, always butch, a little, gruff. So, again, her just confirming her lesbian identity and that kind of thing. My biological father, Fred Hirsch, is an openly gay man. If I get this grant, I'm going to record an album with Fred Hirsch, I swear to God. I love him. I had a private email exchange with Fred Hirsch. I emailed him the very beta demo of my research, and I was just telling him, like, I'm doing queer jazz research, so you're included in this. I would love some feedback. I would love to talk more about you. And he says, you're missing a few names. You're missing Brad Mehldau. I was like, what? Brad Mehldau was Fred Hirsch's protege. Like, he was one of his most successful students. Apparently, Brad Mehldau is bisexual. I cannot find any public record of this information except for according to Fred Hirsch. So something happened in their lessons together where Brad Mehldau came out to Fred Hirsch, and I only know about it because I emailed Fred Hirsch. Fred Hirsch is one of the best pianists of all time. Please look up his album with Esperanza Spalding. It's one of the best in the world. There are so many more names. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. Some of the more modern names, we got Dina DeRose and Cheryl Bailey. They're a couple. They were born in 1966, both of them. Cheryl Bailey actually teaches guitar at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. They had solo careers. They eventually met up, and now they have a joint career. One of the quotes is, for any woman, let alone a gay woman, the business of jazz is competitive enough. For Bailey, the clearest obstacle is gender. So, and again, jazz is difficult for if you're a woman or if you're queer or if you're both, especially. Lots of issues there. We also have Mark Winkler, who was born in 1949. He is a platinum award-winning singer and lyricist who has over 150 of his songs recorded or sung by artists such as Diane Reeves, Randy Crawford, Liza Minnelli, Bob Dorough, and Leah Salona. He's written lyrics. He's cool because he wrote lyrics to jazz standards that didn't originally have lyrics. He's written lyrics to tunes by Wayne Shorter, Dexter Gordon, Joshua Redman, and David Benoit. He's real cool. We also have Avi Wisnia, who has done some LGBTQ showcases for musicians here in Austin. He's still active today. He was born in the 80s. We have Richard Cortez, who is currently very active on Instagram, and he's very funny on Instagram. He's kind of the king of thirst traps. He's talked a lot about being an openly gay man and about struggling to find love and how homophobia has affected his art. I don't know if he's done anything original. I haven't found anything original yet. It might be out there. But he is known for his extensive and ambitious knowledge of the Great American Songbook. He shared the bandstand with some of the world's most celebrated and respected jazz musicians, Sullivan Fortner, Peter Bernstein, who has played in Austin a few times. I've seen him. Orange Julius, it's a real name. Kyle Poole, Paul Gill, Grant Stewart, Alex Claffey, Joe Farnsworth, Jerry Weldon, Joe Strasser, Nicole Glover, who I talk about, Russell Hall, Emmett Cohen. There's just so many names. So again, he's an awesome force today. Brian Carter, who was running a current workshop here in Austin. It's got ties in Austin and New York. It's called the Global Jazz Workshop. Brian Carter, he was born in 1990, little baby. Just kidding, I'm 23, I can't say anything. But Brian Carter, he identifies as queer. He's not necessarily gay, he just says he's queer. Another person who I put him in the bottom section of my lecture about names that I'm just gonna include but not get into. One of the other queer people is Benny Benack III. And I have heard a lot of controversy about him. I included him in one of my Instagram posts featuring him, and I got a private DM saying, hey, Benny Benack is really problematic, you should take him off this post. Anyway, lots of controversy around him. However, he's one of the best vocalists and trumpeters today. And once upon a time, he did an Instagram Q&A, And somebody anonymously asked, "Are you gay?" And he got pissed. And he went on Instagram and he says, "I don't know how many times I have to answer this question." Obviously, I didn't know this. But he was like, "I don't know how many times I have to answer this question, but I identify as queer. I think that love is love. I think people should just be people." Anyway, so I got, firsthand confirmation that Betty Benack is gay. Anyway, so Sarah Hanahan, she was born in 1998, another little baby. I'm covering one of her songs at my set next week. She's really, really cool. She's a dynamic and soulful alto saxophonist. She is engaged to a woman named Sarah Watts. They have an engagement website dedicated to their wedding in 2027. It's called The Sarahs. Sarah Watts, Sarah Hanahan. And in it they talk about SH, notice this about SW, and it's really cute. But again, Sarah Hanahan is one of the most she's a really rising star here in jazz today. She has an album out. She's really, really cool. Eli Malawan, who was also born in the 90s, is a transgender Asian American performing musician, composer, educator, activist who was raised in the Bay Area. If you follow this one on Instagram, his Instagram handle is Saxreligious. He's got a cool sound going on. He's really involved again in techno and that kind of electronic sound. He is associated with the collective and record label, nobody get me in trouble, Fag Jazz, whose mission is to radically reclaim the queer identity and create a safe space for queer musicians to explore jazz. So another, this is what I meant to say about Brian Carter. So Brian Carter, going back, has an initiative called Jazz at Pride. So similar to that, Fag Jazz is another avenue of that. We also have Chloe Rollins, who was born in the 90s. She's a transgender trumpeter. I included her in one of my Instagram posts and accidentally put a picture of a different trumpet player and called her by the same name because there was an issue of her accreditation on Spotify and what album she was on. Anyway, I apologize to her. We had a funny interaction on Instagram once. One of my favorites on here, again, nobody get me in trouble. Lady Gaga is one of the most fierce and prominent voices in modern queer culture, both as a gay icon and bisexual herself. She is a household name of early 2000s pop, dance, electronic music, and in 2011, jazz. She did a jazz album with Tony Bennett. Again, I want to showcase any association of jazz and queer culture. So, this is kind of a big list of all these queer jazz names. I promise I'm almost done. Now I want to just really, really quick touch on, there's a couple people that we need to touch on queer influences on non-queer identities. One of the names is Judy Garland. She is widely considered a gay icon, however, she is a straight woman. The Advocate has called Garland the Elvis of homosexuals. She recorded, she played Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and she recorded Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which became like a gay anthem. Even today, if you go to Package, the sex shop, if you go to their there's like a space where there's like some graffiti, and it says Friends of Dorothy. Friends of Dorothy is a widely spread way for gay men to identify each other, for queer people to say like, "Hey, are you a friend of Dorothy? I know you, like we're from the same town." Okay, so then there's also Peggy Lee. Though a straight woman, was considered a diva and gay icon. There's a quote somewhere in here, I'm not going to go find it, that says, like, I think it was Chris Albert who said it, who was talking about, gay people, they really prefer the divas, like Sarah and Ella, Peggy Lee. There's also Barbra Streisand. Her career started in a gay nightclub in New York. I don't need to say anything else about Barbra Streisand. She's a monster. There's also Chet Baker. This one's funny. Critics called his voice fey and effete. A biographer for Baker described his voice as androgynously sweet and fragile. The perception of his voice conflicted with the social standards of that era, where gender roles were rigid and homophobia was rampant. It also conflicted with the macho stereotypes of male jazz singers, with examples of Billy Eckstine and Louis Armstrong. Baker later said in 1973, "There was a very mixed reaction when I started singing. In the first place, a lot of people thought, foolishly so, that because of the way, I liked fellers." It says that. Or something. I can only say that's a lot of bullshit. According to James Gavin, Baker tried to counteract this by emphasizing his masculinity. I don't know if you've seen Chet Baker, but he looks like a lesbian. He frequently talked about cars and the women in his life and was known to use the homophobic slur faggot. Despite Baker's intentions, according to James Gavin, the album made Baker the first jazz musician with a strong homosexual following. It's a little, controversial. Look at the divas who came before him. Anyway, the singer-songwriter Cherry Vanilla claimed the album was a hit in the gay community. She said all the gay boys who were into jazz were into Chet. So, now I come to my last paragraph here, which I'm just going to sip some coffee and then read to you. In trying to explain how queerness influences a musical identity, it must be acknowledged that there is a subtle queer sound that especially but not only makes itself known when the identity of the musician is understood. That is to say, if one hears a record by Carmen McRae, not knowing about McRae's identity, the queer element of her sound may be lost on the listener. McRae in particular does not sing necessarily homosexual lyrics. It is rather the timbre of her voice and the characterizations of her phrasing that lend themselves to the queer listener. From an instrumentalist perspective, it's easy to hear Fred Hirsch play piano and not be able to distinguish his sexuality based on his sound. However, upon learning of his identity, one must listen to his records through the lens of what it means to be a gay man and how the heartache and unique queer love bleeds into his music. These elements cannot be measured. They are part of the conceptual and colloquial experience of relating to music. There are explicit demonstrations of queer jazz, Richard Cortez singing about another man, Eli Malawan playing a very angular, transgender-coded progressive jazz, and there are more subtle displays of queer jazz where the musician themselves is queer, and therefore their music is queer, but more so by proxy than deliberately. Both are important in the expansion of jazz interpretation and to the idea that new musicians must pay attention and pay homage to the jazz tradition. Queer voices largely create this tradition. There is no corner of jazz that is not graced by queer influence. American songbook, bebop, hard bop, fusion, experimental, every single area of jazz has queer musicians behind it. Queer culture and jazz uplift each other, both emerging from the ashes of oppression and bigotry. Jazz has queer culture and queer musicians to thank for heralding its place in the world today. So that's my lecture. Thank you very much. However, honorable mentions. Frances Faye, Billy Banks, Luthi Smith, Earl Wild, Sammy Ray, John Gilling, Ethan Waters, Alberta Hunter, George Hanna, John Holliday, Addie Braun, Dave Catney, Frankie Jackson, Jessica Williams, Benny Benack, Ben Black, Patrick Arena, Suede, Chantel Chamberlain, Therese Janeko, Sun Ra, John Alcorn, Ann Hampton Calloway, Andy Bay, Mary Lobstron, Ian Shaw, Spencer Day, Tevin Campbell, Maxine Andrews, Lee Taylor, Charles Turner, Graham Collier, John Gill, Charles Anthony Bryant, William Satosh, Nathan Farrell, Kendall Thomas, Jacob Witch, Theo Blackman, Fat Man D, Nicole Glover, Micah Barnes, Heather Bambrick, Billy Newton Davis, Leslie Gore, Chris Connor, Dusty Springfield, Patricia Barber, Leah Delaria, Darius DeHaas, Allison Miller, and Nina Simone are all people you should look up. Thank you.